Chapter 1. Murder in the Bookseller's Alcove. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall mullioned windows of Maplecroft Books, casting golden shafts of light across oak shelves groaning beneath the weight of leather-bound volumes. On a crisp March day the village of Stonyford lay hushed, its narrow lanes deserted save for the occasional rumble of a delivery cart or the distant chime of the church clock. Inside the little bookshop, Mrs. Cornelia Otterburn, proprietress and lifelong bibliophile, polished the glass of a display case with serene diligence, unaware that moments later the peaceful veneer of Maplecroft would shatter dot outside the bell. Over the shop's door tinkled softly as an elderly woman paused on the threshold. Miss Jane Marple of St. Mary Mead peered in with her customary blend of curious anticipation and genteel reserve. Her keen blue eyes took in every detail: the faded Persian rug at her feet, the neat row of well-thumbed paperbacks on a low shelf, the scent of old leather and lavender soap lingering in the warm air. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Otterburn," Miss Marple called, giving a slight nod. Her signature straw hat, trimmed with a sprig of lilac, sat slightly askew atop her silver hair. "I hope I'm not interrupting?" "Not at all, my dear," replied the bookseller, straightening with the air of one who welcomes distraction from routine. She placed the polishing cloth aside and gestured toward a cozy nook at the back of the shop. "I was just organizing my latest shipment of memoirs and poetry. Please, come in. There's fresh tea on the little table, and I've made a new batch of lemon biscuits." Miss Marple smiled warmly and slipped past the counter, glancing at the titles lined up for her inspection. She loved visiting Maplecroft Books for either a literary diversion or, as she sometimes suspected, the promise of social intrigue. It was rare in Stonyford to find a mystery that Mrs. Otterburn couldn't decode with her encyclopedic knowledge of first editions. Yet today Miss Marple felt an undercurrent of disquiet attention. In the silence that told her the village was holding its breath, they settled in the alcove where two high-backed chairs faced one another, separated by a tiny, round table. The afternoon light filtered through saffron-colored lampshades, bathing the scene in gentle warmth. Mrs. Otterburn poured tea into delicate porcelain cups, the hush broken only by the soft hiss of hot water and the sizzling of biscuits set on a scalloped plate. "Thank you, Cornelia," Miss Marple said, taking a small bite of biscuit. "These are quite delightful." "I'm glad you approve," beamed the bookseller. She sat down, steam curling from her teacup. "It's such a dull afternoon, don't you think? I've been eagerly awaiting my delivery, but the carrier held up at Lower Stonyford crossroads. One can't always depend on modern conveniences." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Indeed. But you know," she continued, "some of us rather prefer the deliberate pace. It gives one time to think." A faint sound drifted from the back of the shop, a scuffing noise, followed by a low moan. Mrs. Otterburn paused mid-sip, her face paling. "Excuse me a moment," she murmured, setting down her cup. "That's Mr. Pembroke's alcove. He's been wrestling with that new biography of Disraeli. He's a bit enthusiastic." She rose and crossed the narrow aisle between shelves lined with antique maps and first editions. Miss Marple set down her cup and followed, curious despite herself. As they neared the alcove, the scuffing ceased, replaced by an uneasy silence. "Bernard?" Mrs. Otterburn called softly. Her voice quavered. There was no reply. She reached the alcove's threshold and peered around the corner. Miss Marple, quick behind her, glimpsed the sight at once. Barnard Pembroke, the corpulent and slightly pompous local historian, lay sprawled on the floor, his head resting against a walnut. Bookcase, one arm bent at an odd angle, the other limp beside him. A small pool of dark crimson spread across the worn carpet beneath him. The heavy volume of Disraeli's letters lay open nearby, its pages stained with a splatter of blood. Mrs. Otterburn's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, dear God!" Miss Marple's calm voice cut through the shock. "Cornelia, fetch the vicar and the constable, and do see if Mr. Pembroke is still breathing." As Mrs. Otterburn fled down the aisle, Miss Marple knelt beside the fallen historian. She pressed 2 fingers gently against his neck, feeling for a pulse. The faint throb reassured her that he lived, at least for the moment. She glanced up at the tilted shelves above him. Nothing seemed disturbed beyond the misplaced tome. Her gaze shifted to the narrow window in the alcove, a sliver of sky visible above a low sill. The latch was undisturbed. No footprints marred the thick dust on the window ledge. Yet Pembroke's spilled teacup lay nearby, its contents mingling with the spreading stain. Miss Marple rose and surveyed the scene. Books lay scattered, but none of true value seemed taken or rifled. The open biography suggested he had been reading intensively. Perhaps he discovered something unpalatable. A neat business card peeked from beneath his shoulder. Dr. Clarissa, Webb Psychical Research Society, London. Strange. Pembroke had never mentioned such a connection. Steps sounded at the far end of the shop. The Deacon Reverend Lionel Stokes and Constable Davies hurried into the alcove, faces pale beneath their hats. "Miss Marple?" Stokes said, breathless. "Is he?" "He has a pulse," she assured him, "but he's sustaining a head wound. We must get him to a doctor without delay." Davies nodded and lifted Pembroke carefully. Mrs. Otterburn returned, tears in her eyes, clutching her lace handkerchief. "Thank you, Jane," she whispered. I never expected such horror in my little shop." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Sometimes the quietest corners hide the darkest secrets, Cornelia." She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "We must discover what Mr. Pembroke found so unsettling in these books." As they carried him toward the door, a single leather-bound volume lay open on the floor, a battered edition of Machiavelli's works, its pages splayed as if dropped in haste. Miss Marple picked it up, turning to a bookmarked passage. Her fingers traced the words, and she murmured, "Not all philosophies are benign in careless hands." Outside, the shop bell tinkled again, but Miss Marple paid it no heed. Her mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that threatened to wound her quiet village more deeply than any physical blow. Chapter 2. Secrets in the Margins. Miss Marple awoke the next morning to a fine drizzle tapping against her sitting-room window in St. Mary Mead. The early light was pale and muted, as though reluctant to illuminate the world after last afternoon's shock. Over her tray of tea and toast, she reviewed in her mind the fragments of Mrs. Otterburn's story, the odd business card, and the inexplicable presence of Machiavelli's battered edition. A quiet determination settled in her heart. She would revisit Maplecroft Books at once. By 10 o'clock, she was standing once more beneath the shop's familiar oak sign. The door stood ajar, its bell silent. Inside, discreet chalk marks on the floor indicated yesterday's perimeter. Police tape had since been removed. Mrs. Otterburn, wrapped in a navy shawl and looking exhausted, greeted her at the threshold. "I'm so relieved you've come, Jane," she said, stepping aside. It's felt as if the walls themselves are whispering secrets. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Cornelia, I must know every detail of yesterday, however insignificant it may seem." They passed into the main room. Mrs. Otterburn led her to the alcove. The low carpet had been lifted, revealing faint traces of bloodstain beneath a new pad. The open Machiavelli lay on a small side table, its pages dog-eared where Miss Marple had marked them. "I've kept it just as you found it," said Cornelia, her voice tremulous. "I daren't move anything until you inspect it." Miss Marple knelt and examined the tome. The bookmarked passage spoke of the darker uses of power. He who controls the narrative commands the minds of men. It was a curious choice for Bernard Pembroke, who so admired Disraeli's moral earnestness. She traced a thin brown margin note, likely in Pembroke's tidy hand. "See Disraeli. Caution against despotism." Yet Pembroke had specialized in local history, not political treatises. Why such an unpopular dissertation on tyranny? As Miss Marple rose, Cornelia spoke again. "Bernard was working on his new monograph about Maplecroft Books itself, its history, patrons, and unique first editions. He promised me the draft this week." "How well did you know Mr. Pembroke?" Miss Marple asked. Cornelia paused. "We were friends more or less. I admired his scholarship, though he could be single-minded. He had one churlish habit of proofreading every stray apostrophe in my shop labels, but otherwise he was genial. He mentioned strange visitors last week, to people I'd never seen before." "Who were they?" "One was a tall woman with silver hair, dressed in black velvet, who claimed to be from London. She asked endless questions about Cornelia Chapman, the original owner of this shop. The other was a younger man in pince-nez, interested in Cornelia Chapman's personal correspondence. They didn't stay long, but Bernard watched them closely." Miss Marple tapped her lips. "Did they seem friendly?" Cornelia shuddered. "Not at all. They spoke only to Bernard, and he seemed offended by their implications that Mrs. Chapman's dealings weren't entirely above board." Miss Marple tucked the note into her reticule. "I shall look into these visitors. In the meantime, may I examine the rest of the bookshop?" Cornelia nodded and guided her deeper among the shelves. They passed under a wooden arch set with stained glass panels, leading into the shop's small rear gallery. Here first editions stood in glass cases, each carefully labeled. Cornelia unlocked the display and removed one tome after another, explaining provenance and price, her scholarly excitement returning despite the tragedy. Miss Marple studied each case as if reading a manuscript. She paused before a volume of Gothic poetry, its first edition gilt, lettering gleaming. She peered at the glass, and her eye caught an almost invisible smudge at the corner, as though someone had pressed a fingertip there. Drawing the velvet glove from her pocket, she wiped the glass, unveiling a delicate fingerprint rendered in faint dust. "Have you noticed this before?" she asked. Cornelia leaned forward. "No, I haven't. How curious." Miss Marple pressed her cheek to the glass, inspecting the print. "This belongs to someone of smaller hands, perhaps the woman in black velvet. Keep this safe. I may return." She moved on toward a narrow aisle lined with obscure academic treatises. At its far end, a small desk sat with ledgers and pencils. Here, too, dust had settled unevenly. On the ledger, 4 names were scribed that week. 2 she recognized Bernard, Pembroke and Cornelia Otterburn, and 2 unfamiliar, L. Fairchild and C. Webb. The initials C. Webb echoed the business card for Dr. Clarissa Webb of the Psychical Research Society. The title, L. Fairchild, could belong to the velvet-clad visitor. Miss Marple closed the ledger. "Cornelia, did you ever see these?" "Names?" Cornelia shook her head. "No, they didn't order books. Bernard must have entered them in conversation, perhaps as leads for his monograph." Miss Marple tapped her temple. "Or someone else added them. I think we must speak with the vicar and the doctor next. But first I need more context about these names." She rose and walked to the back door, opening it onto a small courtyard where ivy clung to damp stone walls. A half-broken bench stood under a narrow window. "There's something odd here, too," Miss Marple said, pointing. "Look at that bench, fresh scratches, as if someone knelt here recently. And the window above is unlatched." Cornelia joined her, peering upward. "I've not seen anyone loiter here." "Someone slipped the ledger names into Pembroke's notes," said Miss Marple quietly. "They may have come through here. We must find out who L. Fairchild and Dr. Webb truly are and what they sought." They returned inside. Miss Marple asked Cornelia to prepare a list of all paying patrons who visited in the last fortnight, particularly those who lingered in the archives or asked to handle precious volumes. Cornelia dashed to her office to fetch the ledger of visitors, pausing to glance at the visitor book on her desk. At the top of the page, in Pembroke's neat hand, someone had scrawled, "Beware the legacy hidden in these walls." Miss Marple frowned. "He added that himself?" Cornelia read it aloud, voice shaking. I don't know why he wrote that. He was excited about discovering something new, but he never said these words." A distant clock told 11. Miss Marple folded her gloves. "Cornelia, I will take both the visitor book and the Machiavelli volume with me. Today I shall call on Reverend Stokes to learn about Pembroke's last conversation. Then I shall visit Dr. Webb in London, if need be, and perhaps I will pay a discreet visit to this so-called Fairchild." Cornelia sighed, her shoulders slack. "Do you think Bernard was attacked, or not necessarily attacked?" Miss Marple said. "He may have fainted or been overcome by something he read. Yet the blood tells another tale. Be vigilant, and lock nothing away. I will return this evening." Miss Marple stepped into the drizzle, her mind a whirl of names and clues. She paused by the bookseller's door, hand on the latch, and glanced back at the warm glow within. "Thank you, Cornelia," she said. "I will do my best to protect Maplecroft Books." Then she shut the door behind her, setting out along the rain-slicked street toward her first inquiries, and toward the shadows gathering among the quiet shelves. Chapter 3. Whispers. Behind closed doors, Miss Marple wrapped her shawl tightly against the persistent drizzle as she hurried along the narrow lane toward the vicarage. The slate-roofed building stood at a slight angle from the churchyard, its front door framed by climbing ivy mottled with raindrops. Reverend Lionel Stokes, having recovered from the shock of yesterday's discovery, greeted her at once with polite concern. "Good morning, Jane. he said, stepping aside to admit her into a small book-lined study. The walls were papered in muted blue, and the fragrance of beeswax-polished wood mingled with church incense. On his desk lay Pembroke's notebook, still open to the last entry, a hastily scribbled note ending mid-sentence. Miss Marple closed the door behind her. Lionel, thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I need to know everything you observed when you found Mr. Pembroke. Stokes poured tea from a silver pot into 2 cups. Of course. After the initial alarm, Constable Davies and I managed to get Bernard to the rectory before the doctor arrived. He was semi-conscious, muttering fragments, the legacy, marred by blood, hidden witness. I could not make sense of it. Miss Marple accepted the cup and inhaled the fragrant brew. Did he say anything about those names, Fairchild or Webb? He did. Between shudders he spoke of a Dr. Webb's revelations and Fairchild's betrayal. Then he fell into a feverish sleep, delirious about ancient manuscripts and secret margins. Stokes frowned. He mentioned a room behind the shop, one I did not know existed. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. A hidden room. That would explain much. Did Bernard ever speak to you of his plans for Maplecroft Books? Stokes rubbed his chin. He was obsessed with uncovering the story of Cornelia Chapman, the original proprietor. He believed Chapman concealed something significant in her private studies, something linked to a donation she made in the 19th century. He said it was the heart of the shop's legacy. Miss Marple nodded slowly. And that legacy was marred by blood. She set down her cup. Thank you, Lionel. I must investigate this hidden room. Do you know where it might be? Stokes shook his head. No. He hinted the entrance lay behind a particular shelf in the alcove, but I did not think to ask which. Miss Marple stood. Then I must return to Maplecroft. Would you mind if I borrow Pembroke's notebook for the day? Be my guest, replied Stokes, sliding the notebook across the desk. But be cautious. Bernard was greatly disturbed by what he learned. Miss Marple tucked the notebook into her reticule and bade the vicar farewell. Outside, the rain had intensified, leaving the street slick and deserted. She crossed to the bookshop with determined steps, her mind sorting the vicar's testimony. Chapman's study, hidden away, hinted at a secret long buried, potentially explosive, and the involvement of Dr. Webb and L. Fairchild suggested a more modern interest in the same truth. Inside Maplecroft Books, Cornelia Otterburn awaited her in the main room. Eyes reddened from worry. Miss Marple greeted her quietly. Cornelia, I have questions about the shop's layout. I believe there is a concealed study or private room once used by Mrs. Chapman. Cornelia nodded sadly. Bernard believed so after finding a battered key in the corner of her journal. He showed it to me before everything. She rummaged in her apron pocket and produced a small, ornate skeleton key. He thought it unlocked something. Miss Marple examined the key closely. It was brass, with floral engravings that matched the pattern on the shop's original door. This belonged to Chapman's original desk lock, I suspect. Thank you. She rose. Lead me to the alcove. They crossed the shop and entered the back alcove once more. Miss Marple surveyed the rows of bookshelves, her eyes lingering on the volumes of local history that Pembroke prized. She noted the shelf beneath the stained glass arch. It bore a slightly different grain, as though replaced more recently. Kneeling, she pressed her gloved fingertips to the wood. The grains separated with a faint click, revealing a narrow slot. Cornelia gasped. Was that always there? Miss Marple inserted the key. It turned smoothly. With a gentle push, a hidden panel swung inward, unveiling a cramped passageway delving into darkness. She produced a small hand lamp from her reticule and lit the wick, its glow revealing narrow stone walls stained with age. Goodness, Cornelia whispered. I never imagined Mrs. Chapman would have such a secret space. Miss Marple patted her hand reassuringly. Chapman was a businesswoman of her era perhaps. She needed privacy to correspond or to hide valuables. Come along. She led Cornelia down 3 shuddering steps into a small chamber no larger than a walk-in closet. Rows of pigeonholes lined one wall, each containing folded letters tied with ribbon. Opposite lay a heavy oak desk, its top scarred and dust-laden. Miss Marple blew gently across the surface, dislodging decades of particles. She turned the lamp toward the desk's drawer, which bore a small keyhole matching Chapman's key. Excitement sparkled in her eyes. Cornelia hovered nervously. Jane, do be careful. This feels like trespassing into the past. Miss Marple smiled. Precisely where we must go. She inserted Chapman's key and withdrew a narrow drawer filled with yellowed papers. She examined the first sheet. It was Chapman's ledger of charitable contributions, listing several local orphanages. But scribbled in a small hand were annotations in a different ink, numbers, dates, and names of people unknown to Cornelia. Look here, said Miss Marple, reading aloud, March 1887, 5 sovereigns to Fairchild Trust. Note, unrecorded B Bank. She continued, April 1887, letters to C, 1 answered. Fairchild appears again, she murmured, glancing at Cornelia. Cornelia swallowed. I assumed Fairchild was a later figure. But here she is in Chapman's own records. Miss Marple laid the papers out on the desk. And C.W. likely stands for Chapman's initials, but also matches Dr. Webb's. Clarissa Webb. She tapped the page. Perhaps Chapman corresponded with a Dr. Webb, or someone later appropriated her designation. Someone wants this secret hidden or exposed. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Constable Davies's boots sounded above. Miss Marple extinguished the lamp and closed the drawer. Cornelia, secure these letters exactly as they were and keep the key safe. I will need to copy these entries later. Cornelia still looked pale, but nodded as Davies descended. Miss Marple, he said, halting in the low-ceilinged room, I came to warn you that Dr. Webb was seen in Stonyford this morning, asking at the inn for local directions. Miss Marple placed a hand on the constable's arm. Thank you. Please let me handle her. We must avoid alarming her. She led Davies back up the steps. Cornelia, we have 2 visitors to trace, Fairchild and Webb, both entwined with Chapman's story across generations. Back in the alcove, Miss Marple brushed a stray curl from her face. My next step is to find Dr. Clarissa Webb, wherever she's staying. Meanwhile, would you be kind enough to show me your visitor roster? She unfolded the ledger, its pale pages still listing names and dates. Cornelia opened the book to the entries for the past fortnight. Miss Marple scanned quickly. Fairchild, March 28th, spent an hour examining architectural volumes. Webb, C, arrived March 30th, studied local author biographies. Then both vanished until yesterday, when they spoke privately with Bernard. Cornelia's voice trembled. They seemed intent, but polite. I didn't suspect what they pursued. Miss Marple closed the ledger. They sought Chapman's hidden archive, the room we've just uncovered. Bernard must have felt pressure from them. No wonder he wrote of betrayal. She replaced the ledger in Cornelia's hands. Now I will call at the inn to await Dr. Webb's return. Cornelia, do not admit anyone to the attic or the alcove without Constable Davies present. And keep Chapman's key hidden. Cornelia squared her shoulders. I will, Jane. Miss Marple stepped out into the drizzle, her mind already racing. The puzzle spanned more than a century, linking Chapman's secret benefactions to a modern quest for knowledge or power. As she made her way toward the inn, she could almost hear the faint whisper of folded letters and feel the restless gaze of unseen observers. The legacy of Maplecroft Books had awakened at last, and Miss Marple intended to uncover every whisper of its hidden truth. Chapter 4. Shadows at the Old. In Miss Marple pushed open the heavy oak door of the Stonyford Arms, its bell tolling softly to announce her entrance. The pub's common room smelled of peat smoke and stout, and the late afternoon light slanted through small leaded panes, illuminating dust motes that drifted like restless spirits. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a handful of locals nursed tankards in low, murmured conversation. Behind the bar, landlord Mr. Pritchard polished glasses, his lined face registering polite curiosity at seeing the elderly lady from St. Mary Mead. Ah, Miss Marple, he said, setting aside his rag. What brings you here today? Dr. Webb was in asking for you only minutes ago. Miss Marple inclined her head. Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. I was hoping to catch her before she departed again. May I ask where she's staying? The landlord dabbed his brow. Room 3, up the stairs at the back. She said she'd be returning shortly, something about consulting local records and verifying dates. I told her I'd send her your compliments. Very kind, she smiled. I'll wait in the parlor. He nodded and returned to his work. Miss Marple crossed the common room and slipped into an adjoining parlor, where a faded settee and 2 winged chairs faced an overmantel mirror. The carpet underfoot bore patterns, worn nearly smooth by countless patrons. By the window stood a small writing desk with pens and blotter, evidently left for travelers' convenience. Settling into a chair, Miss Marple placed Pembroke's notebook open on her lap. She reread the vicar's notes about Chapman's hidden study and the cryptic fragments of illness and betrayal that the confused historian had uttered. Then she pulled from her reticule the ledger copy she had made of Chapman's annotations. Fairchild, Webb, secret donations undeposited at the local bank. All of it suggested someone had pursued this secret ruthlessly across generations. Distant footstep on the stairs made her look up. The door creaked, and a tall woman entered, her presence like a blade of ice in the warm room. Dr. Clarissa Webb was every bit the portrait Pembroke had described. Silver hair swept into a neat chignon, high-collared black jacket, skirt to the ankle, and pince-nez perched on her aquiline nose. In her hand she carried a battered leather satchel, its edges scuffed from travel. She paused, saw Miss Marple, and smiled with practiced courtesy, though her dark eyes betrayed a slight tension. Miss Marple, she said, inclining her head, I was told you wished to speak with me. Dr. Webb, Miss Marple replied. closing the notebook gently. "Thank you for waiting. Please sit down." She gestured to the settee. "May I offer you tea?" Dr. Webb placed her satchel on the desk and sank gracefully onto the edge of the settee. "Tea would be lovely, thank you." Miss Marple rang a small bell on the table. Within moments, Mr. Pritchard's daughter entered with a tray. Miss Marple poured 2 cups and handed one to Dr. Webb before taking her own in the wing chair opposite. They sipped in companionable silence for a moment. "I trust you found the village records useful?" Miss Marple prompted. Dr. Webb set down her cup. "Quite. Your bookseller, Mrs. Otterburn, was most hospitable." She paused, choosing her words. "I'm afraid I have somewhat alarmed her with questions about Cornelia Chapman's correspondence. She nearly fell off her chair when I mentioned the names Fairchild and Dr. Webb." Miss Marple nodded. "Chapman's archive is indeed sensitive. Pray tell me why you came here, Dr. Webb. Your presence at Maplecroft Books seemed innocent at first, but on the day before Mr. Pembroke's accident, you and one L. Fairchild lingered long in the alcove, speaking privately." Dr. Webb's lips tightened. "My colleague, Miss Fairchild, and I are both members of the Psychical Research Society. We study the influence of historical donations on community memory. Mrs. Chapman's anonymous gifts intrigued us, particularly those unrecorded at the bank. We hoped to find her original letters, believing them to contain musings on spiritual matters." She tapped her satchel. "Mr. Pembroke had offered to show us Mrs. Chapman's personal archive. He confided that the ledger in the hidden room contained more than mere ledgers, that letters spoke of remorse, guilt, and perhaps darker dealings." Miss Marple leaned forward. "And yet he ended up injured, bleeding, incoherent. Did you witness anything untoward before he collapsed?" Dr. Webb shook her head. "I was in London that afternoon, attending a society meeting. I returned later to Stonyford and found him there." She held Miss Marple's gaze. "I'm sorry, he may have been hurt by falling from a ladder. He often climbed to reach high shelves." "Indeed," said Miss Marple, letting the suggestion linger in the air. "Yet he spoke of betrayal, of blood, of hidden witnesses." She tapped the notebook in Miss Marple's lap. "I have reviewed his own writings. He believed the letters might implicate someone in the Chapman family, or perhaps outside it, in misconduct. Did you see or hear anything that day?" "A misstep." "A slip?" Dr. Webb's gloved hands tightened around her cup. "I saw him handle a letter. He unfurled it, read the parchment, and suddenly turned pale. He murmured something about a name he had not expected one that appeared in the margin of Chapman's own hand." She swallowed. "Then he toppled backward." Miss Marple watched her quietly. "That suggests the letter revealed unexpected content, something deeply personal to Mr. Pembroke. Did you glimpse the name?" Dr. Webb hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Fairchild." The name Fairchild was written in Chapman's hand, right after a line about secret payments. She glanced at her watch. "I'm sorry, but I must return to London tonight. My research could be jeopardized if I stay longer." Miss Marple's curls bobbed. "Of course, but I must request that you leave your satchel with me until tomorrow morning." She gestured gently. "Those letters, old as they are evidence in a near-fatal incident. I'm sure you understand." Dr. Webb's eyes flickered. "I understand." She lifted the satchel and hesitated. "Very well, Jane, but please be discreet. The Society does not reveal its methods or unique finds." Miss Marple nodded. "Certainly. I'll have Constable Davies collect it." Dr. Webb set down the satchel and rose. "Thank you for your hospitality. I hope Mr. Pembroke recovers fully." Miss Marple escorted her to the door. In the hallway, the afternoon's light had dimmed, and the inn's upper corridors lay silent. Dr. Webb paused, placing her hand on the banister. "Miss Marple, I urge caution. Some secrets are buried for a reason." With that, she ascended the stairs to her room, disappearing at the landing's corner. Inside the parlor, Miss Marple retrieved the satchel and opened it with a small key Dr. Webb had left behind. Inside lay a stack of folded letters addressed to Chapman under her maiden name, Cornelia Chapman, not the bookseller, Cornelia Otterburn. Miss Marple drew out the top letter, its script elegant and archaic, and read the opening lines. "My dearest Cornelia, I regret that these clandestine payments have become more complicated than I foresaw." A chill passed through Miss Marple. The correspondence was centuries old, yet marked with ink still fresh in places where names and dates had been added later. Someone had used Chapman's own stationery to craft additions, annotations that pointed to a scandal far more recent. Who had tampered with these letters? Who wanted the Chapman secrets unearthed now? She glanced at her watch. 4:30. The rain had eased to a drizzle outside, but the sky was already darkening. She folded the letters carefully back into the satchel, her mind alight with possibilities. Between Chapman's hidden study, Pembroke's blood-stained margin notes, Fairchild's mysterious legacy, and Webb's cryptic warnings, the puzzle was more treacherous than she had first imagined. Miss Marple stood and smoothed her skirt. It was time to consult Constable Davies, both to secure the satchel and to question this Miss Fairchild, who had yet to reveal herself in person. As she stepped out into the corridor, the inn's silence followed her like a watchful sentinel. Secrets trembled in the shadows of this ancient building, and Miss Marple knew she must tread carefully, lest she awaken ghosts better left undisturbed. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Archive. Miss Marple stepped into the chill evening air with Dr. Webb's satchel tucked securely under her arm. The rain had ceased, leaving cobblestones slick and cold beneath her sensible shoes. She paused at the lamp post outside the Stonyford Arms, summoning Constable Davies by gently stamping her foot twice, a signal he recognized. Within moments, his broad figure emerged from the shadows. "Here you are, ma'am," he said, taking the satchel with careful hands. "I'll lock this in the station until morning." "Thank you, Davies," Miss Marple replied, patting his sleeve. "Please, ensure no one tampers with it. These letters may hold the key to what happened to Mr. Pembroke." She watched the constable hurry off, the satchel swinging at his side, before turning her gaze toward the church. Reverend Stokes had agreed to share the church's archive room for a discreet meeting. Miss Marple felt the pull of urgency. Fairchild's name echoed through every clue, yet the woman herself remained elusive. She crossed the rain-slick street and ascended the steps to the old stone church, pausing at the carved door before knocking. "Jane!" called the vicar's voice from within. The door creaked open, revealing Stokes's anxious countenance. He ushered her into the narrow nave, where the hush of centuries greeted them. "Thank you for coming so promptly," he said, leading her through a side door to a dimly lit chamber. Rows of dusty ledgers and parchment scrolls filled the shelves. This was Stonyford's memory keeper, a repository of the parish's history. Miss Marple removed a small notebook from her reticule. Lionel, I need your help identifying the Fairchild mentioned in Chapman's ledger. I've discovered payments to a Fairchild trust in 1887, and I suspect a modern descendant may be behind this, she explained, summarizing her discoveries. Stokes gestured to a thick folio. We have a list of families who contributed to the church fund. Perhaps Fairchild appears there. He opened the volume to an index of surnames and ran his finger down the entries. Yes, Fairchild, Edmund and Clara, 1875 and 1880. But no. Entry for 1887. Miss Marple frowned. That suggests Chapman's payment was off the record, a secret donation, perhaps to someone not formally associated with the parish. She tapped the ledger's spine. Do we have any records from the local Fairchild Trust or their private ledger? Stokes shook his head. The Fairchilds were wealthy industrialists. Their trust records are held in London. He ran a finger down a roll of vellum. But here this marginal note refers to a Lucy Fairchild mentioned in Mrs. Chapman's will. I recall that a great-niece inherited the shop on Cornelia Chapman's death in 1902. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. Lucy Fairchild L. Fairchild. That must be our visitor. She likely came to reclaim her ancestors' legacy. She jotted the name. Where might she be staying? Stokes considered. Perhaps at the old rectory guest house, the only place, with rooms available. I can call ahead to see if she's registered. Miss Marple straightened. Excellent. In the meantime, I need to inspect Mr. Pembroke's notebook again. She opened the small volume he had lent her and turned to the last legible entry. Found correspondence between C.C. and L.F. hidden cipher in margins. Must proceed with caution. Miss Marple uttered a soft H-N-P-H. Stokes peered over her shoulder. A cipher? Indeed, she said, tracing the words. Those marginal notes in Chapman's ledger may conceal a code. Perhaps the payments were accompanied by secret instructions. She closed the notebook. We must find Lucy Fairchild and see what she hopes to discover. The vicar hurried from the room, promising to send word if Lucy appeared. Miss Marple lingered by a row of bound volumes, her reflection flickering in the small panes of glass. The church archives whispered of past mysteries, baptisms, funerals, parish councils, but here, tonight, the weight of Chapman's secret pressed most heavily. The old rectory guest house was a whitewashed building at the edge of Stonyford Common, its windows dark except for the glow of a single lamp in the reception room. Miss Marple paused on the threshold and inhaled deeply. The scent of must and tea rose on the night air. She knocked, and the door opened to reveal a plump matron in starched apron. "Good evening," Miss Marple said. "I'm looking for Miss Fairchild, Lucy Fairchild, who may have registered here." The matron's eyes widened. "Yes, I believe she's upstairs in room 5. I wondered why she kept to herself." She led the way past polished floors and portraits of somber rectors. She arrived this afternoon, gave her name without much explanation, and requested quiet. At the fork in the corridor, the matron gestured. "Room 5 is the second door on the left." "Thank you," Miss Marple said, laying a gentle hand on the woman's wrist. "If you see anyone else ask after her, please direct them to me below." The matron nodded, her expression tight with concern. Miss Marple climbed the stairs and approached the door. She knocked softly, then listened. No sound emerged in unnatural silence. Miss Marple turned the knob. It yielded. She entered the room, closing the door behind her. A simple bed stood against one wall, its quilt neatly smoothed. A small writing desk held a single lamp and an open book of architectural sketches. On the desk lay a leather-bound notebook, likely Fairchild's, alongside a stack of photocopies of Chapman's letters. Against the far wall, a wardrobe lay slightly ajar, revealing coats and scarves embroidered with a monogram, L.F. Miss Marple. Stepped forward, fixing her pince-nez. She lifted the leather notebook and flipped through pages of neat script. Fairchild had transcribed Chapman's marginalia, noting cipher symbols, dots and dashes interspersed with numerical annotations. Miss Marple traced a line of symbols and murmured, "Morse? A simple substitution?" She jotted a quick note. Margin cipher equals MF returns to shop. A faint click from outside startled her, a key sliding into the door. Miss Marple extinguished, the lamp's flame plunging the room into gloom. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her heart calm but alert. The handle turned, the door opened, and Lucy Fairchild stepped in, her tall silhouette framed in the hallway light. She carried a satchel similar to Dr. Webb's, but larger. Fairchild closed the door softly and moved toward the desk, unsettled. By the unlit lamp, Miss Marple stepped out of the shadows, smoothing her shawl. "Miss Fairchild, I presume?" Fairchild started, dropping a few sheets of paper. "Good heavens, Miss Marple! How did you—" "I followed the trail of Chapman's legacy," Miss Marple said gently, stooping to gather the papers. "You have been quite busy copying those letters." She placed them in a neat pile on the bed. "May I ask why you came?" Fairchild's expression hardened. "I wanted to preserve my great-aunt's history. These letters prove she secretly funded the Fairchild Trust, an act of charity erased by time." She folded her arms. "I had no intention to harm Mr. Pembroke. He was so excited by the cipher that he overreached and fell." Miss Marple studied her. "He spoke of betrayal of hidden witnesses." She tapped the bedpost. "Your photocopies reveal more than a simple account. Someone added notes in a later hand, someone who wanted Chapman's secrets exposed now. Do you recognize these annotations?" Fairchild's gaze flicked to the papers. "Those aren't mine. I merely transcribed what I found in the secret chamber." She met Miss Marple's eyes steadily. "I suspect another party has tampered with the archive, someone seeking leverage against the Chapman or Fairchild lines." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Indeed. And you've crossed paths with Dr. Webb, who seems to believe in spiritual significance. But what of Dr. Webb's society? Their interest in community memory may cloak a financial motive." Fairchild's lips twitched. "Many academic societies have private funding. If Chapman's legacy includes an unrecorded endowment, that could be worth millions today." Miss Marple inhaled sharply. "So we have at least 3 pursuers of this secret. Dr. Webb, you, and someone else, perhaps a third party embedded in the village." Fairchild's eyes narrowed. "Who else could that be?" Miss Marple tapped the leather notebook. "Bernard Pembroke himself. His final cipher entry pointed to a name he discovered at the last minute. We must find that name." She turned toward the door. Miss Fairchild, I will need your cooperation. Please remain here tonight and await Constable Davies in the morning. He will escort you to the shop, and together we will examine the cipher in detail." Fairchild hesitated, then inclined. Her head, "Very well, Miss Marple." She retrieved her satchel, and set it beside the desk. Miss Marple slipped from the room and closed the door behind her. The hallway lay still once more. She descended the stairs, her mind alive with new leads. An unknown annotator, a cipher yet to be cracked, and a hidden hand-stirring events in Stonyford. The night wrapped the village in silent anticipation, but Miss Marple's resolve burned bright. When morning came, the true story behind the Chapman legacy would begin to emerge, and she would be ready. Chapter 6. The Cipher. Unveiled Miss Marple arrived at Maplecroft Books just after dawn, the sky a pale wash of gray that hinted at lingering rain. Constable Davies stood at the shop's threshold, his breath visible in the cool air. Lucy Fairchild waited inside, her expression taut with anticipation. Miss Marple greeted them both warmly, then ushered Fairchild to the alcove where Chapman's hidden study had so recently been discovered. "Thank you for coming so promptly," Miss Marple said. "We have letters to decipher and a mystery to unravel." She placed Pembroke's notebook on the small round table, along with Fairchild's leather-bound transcription. Davies locked the satchel containing Dr. Webb's materials in the back office for safekeeping, promising it would remain untouched until required. Once the shop was closed behind them, Miss Marple began. "Bernard's final entry mentions a cipher hidden in the margins of Chapman's ledger. We saw dots, dashes, and numbers. Let us transcribe it accurately before proceeding." Fairchild took the transcription from her bag and laid it beside the ledger. Miss Marple donned her pince-nez and traced the first line. 8317 she tapped, her finger thoughtfully. Not a simple Morse code. The numbers suggest either page references or a polyalphabetic key, perhaps pointing to specific words or letters. She turned to Fairchild. "Do you recall any annotation explaining their context?" Fairchild nodded. Chapman noted in her handwriting, "For L.F. Seek beyond the binding." That implies she hid something physically in the book binding itself. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "Indeed. If the numbers correspond to page and line, then the code may reveal instructions to locate a concealed compartment. Let us match the first number, 8, to page 8 of Chapman's ledger draft." She opened the ledger manuscript, yellowed but intact, and leafed to page 8. "Now count to the third word on the first line, then the first word on the 7th line, and so forth." Davies crouched beside her, watching as she methodically extracted the words. In less than 10 minutes she read aloud, "Remove beneath, oak, floorboard." She folded her hands. The cipher clearly instructs us to remove a floorboard beneath the oak desk. Chapman must have hidden something there for her great-niece, perhaps. A final will or testament. Fairchild's lip quivered. If so, that document would settle any dispute over the Fairchild Trust and Chapman's unrecorded donations. "No wonder others have sought it," Miss Marple nodded. "But we must be cautious. Someone else knows of its existence, and they may return." She rose and tapped the desk. "Davies, could you fetch the small pry bar from the back?" "Gently." "Please." The constable returned swiftly. Miss Marple knelt beside the desk. the oak surface still bearing faint scratches from Chapman's key. She inserted the tip of the pry bar into a seam between floorboards and applied gentle leverage. With a soft click, the board lifted, revealing a shallow cavity beneath. She withdrew a slim, dust-covered box, stained dark with age. Carefully, she carried it to the table and set it before Fairchild. The box was unadorned but for an embossed monogram, C.C., Cornelia Chapman's initials. Miss Marple broke the seal and opened the lid to reveal folded parchment, tied with faded ribbon, and a small leather satchel containing several sovereigns tarnished by time. Fairchild's eyes brimmed. She lifted the top parchment and unfurled. This is her final will. She bequeathed the Fairchild Trust 500 sovereigns, with instructions to aid the orphans of Stonyford. And here, Fairchild pointed to a marginal note in Chapman's firm hand, ensure this trust remains separate from family heirs. Protect their memories beyond temporal gain. Tears slipped down Fairchild's cheek. She wanted the charity to outlive any claimants. Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on Fairchild's shoulder. Your great-aunt was generous and forward-thinking, but it seems someone has tampered with her legacy. She turned to the leather satchel. These coins were meant to be symbolic, yet clearly the annotation in the letters suggested additional sums, unrecorded by Chapman. Someone forged those notes to inflate the trust's value. Davies frowned. But who would benefit from fabricating a larger endowment? Academics like Dr. Webb might gain prestige, but a forged bequest doesn't help the orphans. Miss Marple tapped the table. Perhaps the forger sought leverage, blackmail, or publicity rather than charity. If a wealthy benefactor believes Chapman's trust is more valuable than it is, they might pay handsomely for confirmation. She eyed Fairchild. Did you inform Dr. Webb of your discovery before she left? Fairchild shook her head. I intended to study these documents in private first. I feared larger institutions would seize control. Miss Marple nodded slowly. A prudent thought. But secrecy also breeds suspicion. Meanwhile, this forgery must be traced. She addressed Davies. Constable, please record these items as evidence and arrange for a qualified document examiner to verify the authenticity of Chapman's handwriting versus the forged marginalia. Davies saluted. At once, ma'am. He carefully replaced the parchments in the box and the coins in the satchel, sealing them for transport. Fairchild turned to Miss Marple. Thank you for guiding me, but I worry for my safety. If someone else discovered this hidden deposit, they might stop at nothing to obtain it. Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. You are safe here in Stonyford, my dear, but vigilance is required. I will keep watch on Dr. Webb's movements when she returns, and I will speak with Mrs. Otterburn about tightening security in the shop. A stout knock sounded at the front door, startling them all. Miss Marple set her basket aside and exchanged a glance with Davies, who reached for his truncheon. She moved toward the entrance and opened the door to reveal Mrs. Otterburn. Flushed and breathless, Jane, I'm so glad you're here. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I received a note slipped under my door no return address. It warned me to mind my history and old ghosts. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She took the note from Otterburn's trembling hand and read aloud, The past is not always dead. Beware the debts it owes. Otterburn's eyes widened. What does it mean? Miss Marple folded the paper and tucked it into her reticule. "It's a warning someone knows more than they let on. We must find out who sent this note," she addressed Davies. "Please take Mrs. Otterburn home and ensure her doors and windows are secure. Then inquire among the villagers who might have motive to threaten her." "Right away, ma'am," Davies responded, his tone grim. Once Davies and Otterburn departed, Fairchild turned to Miss Marple. "More intrigue surrounds this legacy than I anticipated." Miss Marple nodded, gathering the small box and satchel. "The truth is seldom straightforward, Lucy, but we've uncovered Chapman's true intent and revealed a forgery. Now we will identify the forger and discover what debts the past demands." She glanced at the cipher notes, the letters, and the faint stain of blood that lingered in her memory. "Tomorrow I will visit Dr. Webb in London and question her about these forged annotations, and you, my dear, should rest. The orphans of Stonyford may not know it yet, but your great-aunt's generosity is safe for now." As dusk settled over Stonyford, Miss Marple retrieved her shawl and hat, ready to pursue the final threads of a century-old secret. The cipher had been unveiled, but the shadows cast by Chapman's legacy stretched far into the present, and she was determined to expose them all. Chapter 7. A meeting in London. Miss Marple sat forward in the compartment of the late-morning train, bound for Paddington, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. Through the damp window, the rolling hills of the Cotswolds gave way to gray suburbs, the city's smoggy skyline emerging beyond. Beside her, the bookshop box and leather satchel lay stacked, reminders of the hidden chamber she had uncovered at Maplecroft. She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Chapman's true will was safe, the cipher solved, and Fairchild's inheritance secured for now. Yet the warning slipped under Cornelia Otterburn's door weighed upon her. The past is not always dead. Beware the debts it owes. Whoever sent that note remained unknown, their hand hidden in the shadows of history. The train whistle shrieked as it pulled into Paddington Station. Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped over one arm, and stepped onto the polished platform. She navigated the bustling crowds with practiced ease, pausing only to consult a slip of paper with Dr. Clarissa Webb's London address, 14 Bedford Place, Bloomsbury. A short cab ride later, she found herself before a modest townhouse, its brick facade dotted with ivy. She knocked lightly on the frosted glass panel beside the door. A crisp voice answered, "Come in." Miss Marple entered a narrow vestibule lined with framed certificate seals of the Psychical Research Society. The front door opened silently into a reception room where a stern-looking woman in gray tweed stood behind a small desk. "Yes?" Miss Marple offered a calm smile. "I'm Mrs. Jane Marple, from Stonyford. I am here to speak with Dr. Clarissa Webb about her recent visit to my village." The woman behind the desk flicked a glance at a notebook and tapped a bell. "One moment, please." She disappeared down a corridor. Moments later, she reappeared, gesturing down a carpeted hallway. "Dr. Webb is in the archives room. Follow me." Miss Marple followed the attendant through a series of low-ceilinged corridors, past rooms filled with tomes on spiritualism, folklore, and antiquarian manuscripts. Finally, they reached a heavy wooden door marked Archives. The attendant opened it and ushered Miss Marple inside. Rows of tall shelves stretched into semi-darkness. Lit by shaded lamps, Dr. Clarissa Webb sat at a heavy oak table strewn with yellowed papers and leather-bound volumes. She looked up, her pince-nez perched on the edge of her nose, and offered a polite nod. "Mrs. Marple," she said, rising, "I did not expect you so soon." "Good afternoon, Dr. Webb," Miss Marple replied, adjusting her shawl. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice. May I join you?" Dr. Webb gestured to a high-backed chair. "Certainly. I have reviewed your letters and Pembroke's notes upon my return. I confess I was unsettled by the forged annotations in Chapman's hidden will." Miss Marple kept her voice soft. "Forged annotations added in a later hand suggest someone sought to inflate Chapman's charitable legacy. Can you explain why the society would be interested in unrecorded payments, especially if those payments were spurious?" Dr. Webb's gaze flickered toward a nearby shelf. "The study of community memory is not purely academic. We have evidence that undisclosed gifts shape local belief in benevolence and social order. Chapman's unrecorded donations might have created a spiritual bond between the living and the deceased benefactor." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Spiritual bond, quite. Yet why forge extras if no one knew of them? If your interest lies in measuring spiritual influence, why not record only what Chapman herself intended?" Dr. Webb met her gaze. "A fair question. We believed the marginalia belonged to Chapman. The extra payments suggested a deeper generosity, a threshold beyond which her spirit would be more potent in the community's subconscious. It was hypothesis-driven." Miss Marple tapped a slender finger on the letter in front of her. "Hypothesis-driven forgery, dangerous territory, Dr. Webb, especially when it leads to someone being injured. Mr. Pembroke spoke of betrayal and buried witnesses before he collapsed." Dr. Webb's face grew stern. "Mr. Pembroke's fall was an accident. He was unsettled by the content of the letters by discovering that Chapman's own judgment lent weight to our research. He may have lost his footing in distraction." Miss Marple studied her. "Perhaps. Yet he specifically mentioned Fairchild's betrayal. Do you see how that implicates someone beyond an innocent fall?" Dr. Webb sighed and sank into her chair. "I admit I resented Pembroke's secrecy. He withheld Chapman's cipher from me until he felt prepared to involve the society. By the time I arrived, much damage was done. I told myself it was academic rivalry, but," her voice softened, "some part of me feared he would use the cash for personal gain or sell it to private collectors." Miss Marple folded her hands. "A noble fear. But that does not justify forgery or the rushed investigation that may have endangered a man's life." She leaned closer. "Dr. Webb, were you aware of someone else's involvement? A third party who might have manipulated the letters further?" Dr. Webb hesitated. "I thought Miss Fairchild was pursuing the same goal as I, to preserve Chapman's spiritual legacy. But after returning to London, I discovered someone from the society had removed certain documents from our central archive, letters that matched Chapman's handwriting but contained additional marginalia I did not recognize." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Someone within your own society removed documents and replaced them with forged ones?" Dr. Webb nodded, mortified. "Yes. I suspect a colleague, perhaps Mr. Geraldine, the archivist. He has long held grudge against Chapman's methods, believing psychical research should remain empirical rather than sentimental. Miss Marple leaned back. Is Mr. Geraldine aware of Chapman's hidden study at Maplecroft Books? Dr. Webb shook her head. No, that was Bernard Pembroke's discovery. But Mr. Geraldine has traveled in secret, using academic pretext to access private collections. If he learned of Chapman's cipher, he might have forged extra marginalia to increase the value of society findings and eliminate Pembroke as a competitor. Miss Marple stood, smoothing her gloves. Thank you, Dr. Webb. Your candor is appreciated. I will need the names of those in your society who had means and motive to tamper with Chapman's letters. Dr. Webb retrieved a list from her desk and handed it across. These are our senior members with archival privileges, Geraldine, Mr. Reginald Geraldine. Also Miss Halkett and Professor Remington. They had access. Miss Marple slipped the list into her reticule. One final question. Do you still wish to claim Chapman's legacy for the Psychical Research Society? Dr. Webb paused, then nodded curtly. Yes, but only if the findings are authentic. I underestimated the risks of secrecy. Miss Marple inclined her head. Very well. I shall return to Stonyford and coordinate with Constable Davies. We will examine the Society's London findings against the originals from Maplecroft. If Mr. Geraldine or another acted improperly, they must be held accountable. Dr. Webb stood as Miss Marple did. I appreciate your dedication, Mrs. Marple. Please let me know if I can assist further. Miss Marple offered a gentle smile. Thank you, Dr. Webb. The truth must be unveiled, no matter whose legacy it upholds. She left the archives room and navigated back through the labyrinth of hallways to the reception. The attendant admitted her into the cool daylight, and Miss Marple paused before stepping outside. She breathed deeply of the London air, bracing herself for the return journey. On the way back to Paddington, her thoughts whirled around Mr. Geraldine and the forged marginalia. Somewhere among the dusty tomes of the Society's archives, the original letters lay hidden, their true annotations untainted, and in Stonyford the past waited, patient and unyielding. Miss Marple closed her eyes and whispered, Tomorrow the debts of history will be paid. Chapter 8. Confronting the archivist Miss Marple, returned to Stonyford late on the following afternoon, alighting from the train with the waning light of early evening gilding the platform. In her reticule lay Dr. Webb's list of possible forgers, Mr. Reginald Geraldine, Miss Halkett, and Professor Remington, any one of whom might have tampered with Chapman's letters in London. Yet she sensed Geraldine as the likeliest culprit. His reputation for ambition and his whispered disdain of sentimental research had surfaced in her inquiries. Now she needed concrete proof, and the cooperation of Constable Davies. She found Davies waiting on the station platform, his uniform crisp despite a day's labor. He offered a brisk salute. Welcome back, Mom. I've secured Chapman's box and the forged marginalia for examination. Mrs. Otterburn sends her regards. Thank you, Constable, Miss Marple replied, climbing into the waiting patrol car. Let us drive straight to Maplecroft Books. I wish to compare the Society's photocopies against the originals once more. Then we must visit Geraldine. If he remains in London, I shall have to write to your superiors. But first we test our evidence. The bookshop's lamplit windows glowed as they approached. Inside, Cornelia Otterburn greeted them with relief, binding her shawl about her shoulders. Oh, Mrs. Marple, I've been so worried. Have you unearthed the truth?" Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "We have strong leads. Please bring Pembroke's notebook, the leather satchel of sovereigns, and the box containing Chapman's will. Davies, please lock the shop door when we begin." Once seated around the alcove table, Miss Marple placed side by side the photocopy of Chapman's marginalia from the Society's archives and the original manuscript from the hidden study. She donned her pince-nez and examined the ink. "Notice," she said, pointing at the photocopy, "this flourish on the tail of the eye and legacy. It is present here, but absent in the original." She laid down the photocopy and took up the real parchment. Chapman's handwriting is neat, with minimal ornamentation. The additional flourishes in darker ink indicate a later hand. Davies frowned. "So someone replaced the original with a modified version in London." "Precisely," said Miss Marple. "Likely Geraldine or an accomplice, someone with direct access. But how did he learn of Chapman's hidden study?" "Only Bernard Pembroke knew its location, and he never left town after discovering it. That suggests our forger had help from within Stonyford." Cornelia stiffened. "Do you mean someone in the village leaked the cipher location?" Miss Marple tapped her lips. "Yes, someone close to Mrs. Otterburn may have shared the key or the location for personal gain. A trusted assistant, perhaps." She turned to Davies. "Do you know if Mrs. Otterburn employs any help in the shop?" Davies shook his head. "Only her cousin, Miss Edith Fairchild. She visits twice weekly to assist with stock. Oddly, she has the same surname as Lucy Fairchild." He rubbed his chin. "I believed she was related to Miss Fairchild." Cornelia paled. "Edith Fairchild is no relation. She's Cornelia Chapman's great-niece to Lucy's cousin. Lucy Fairchild inherited the trust, but Edith inherited the shop itself under Chapman's will. But Edith seldom visits. She's lived in London and rarely sees the village." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "Edith Fairchild, another L. Fairchild? Could Edith and Lucy be the two Fairchilds who first visited the alcove together?" She leaned back. "Edith may have learned of the hidden study through family lore, then confided in Geraldine during a London visit. That would explain how he gained access to Chapman's originals to forge the marginalia." Cornelia shook her head. "Edith never mentioned any interest in the archive. She comes only to advise on shop matters. But I suppose family secrets often lie dormant." Davies spoke up. "I can send a wire to London for Edith Fairchild's address. If she resides near Geraldine or the Society's headquarters, we may link them." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, but first we must secure Geraldine's own archives. I will write to your Inspector Davies, requesting permission to seize the relevant file copies from the Psychical Research Society. Meanwhile, Cornelia, I must ask you to lock Chapman's room and allow no one know one inside without my or the constable's presence." "I understand," said Cornelia, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll install a deadbolt by morning." Miss Marple stood smoothing her skirt. "Good. Tonight I will draft the letter to London. Let us gather in the morning to coordinate with the village postmistress. Perhaps Edith has left a forwarding address in the mail register. We are close, Davies. We will unmask our conspirator." That evening Miss Marple sat at her small writing desk in her lodging, the lamp casting a warm glow on her silver hair. She penned a carefully worded letter to Inspector Gregory at Scotland Yard. My dear Inspector Gregory, I write concerning a matter that originated in the village of Stonyford, Devonshire, and involves your esteemed Psychical Research Society. It appears that certain documents belonging to the late Cornelia Chapman of Maplecroft books were illicitly removed from private archive access and replaced with forged marginalia. The principal suspect is Mr. Reginald Geraldine, your society's archivist. I request authorization through your office to examine and, if necessary, seize the relevant files and photocopies in Geraldine's possession. I shall forward a detailed report upon arrival. Sincerely, Mrs. Jane Marple. She folded the letter and addressed it in her neat hand to Scotland Yard. As she applied a wax seal, her thoughts drifted to Mr. Geraldine's motive. Academic ambition, prestige, and the promise of a sensational discovery likely drove him to risk forgery and injure an unwitting historian. But the added involvement of Edith Fairchild suggested a deeper, familial betrayal, one that cut across generations of Chapmans and Fairchilds. Miss Marple extinguished the lamp and lay back, closing her eyes. She pictured the rows of dusty volumes in the Society's London archives and imagined Geraldine's careful handwriting. With the village's assistance and the inspector's cooperation, she felt confident they would soon recover the originals and expose the forger. The next morning, Stonyford awoke to crisp sunlight. In Maplecroft Books, Cornelia Otterburn installed the new deadbolt on the hidden door under Miss Marple's supervision. The brass turn clicked solidly. Behind them, Constable Davies reviewed the post register with Mrs. Penelope Heath, the village's elderly postmistress. I'm looking for any mail addressed to Miss Edith Fairchild, Miss Marple explained. Perhaps a current address in London. Heath adjusted her spectacles. Edith Fairchild? Yes, she corresponded with her solicitor. Here she's now lodging at 37 Woburn Square, Bloomsbury. I have the letter. She handed Davies the envelope. Miss Marple took the envelope. Thank you, Mrs. Heath. That will be very helpful. She turned to Davies. We have our London link. Once Gregory grants permission, I shall proceed there, and you can coordinate with London Yard for assistance. Davies nodded. Very good, ma'am. He put the address in his notebook. Miss Marple smiled. Excellent. Cornwall may yet yield her secrets, but justice is near. Today we wait for the inspector's reply, and then we will confront our conspirators on both sides of the law. As the afternoon sun warmed the shop's stained glass windows, Miss Marple stood in the alcove, gazing at the sealed door. Behind it lay the world's quietest secret, now safe from prying hands. Tomorrow she would follow the trail of papers and money back to London's narrow streets, where a certain archivist awaited his reckoning. For now she allowed herself a moment of contentment. Chapman's legacy, restored at last, was poised to reveal the true debts of the past, and to settle them once and for all. Chapter 9. Threads of treachery. The dawn light sifted through the windows of Maplecroft Books as Miss Marple and Constable Davies prepared to depart for London. The station platform was quiet when they arrived, mist curling over the rails like the whisper of an old secret. Miss Marple clutched her reticule and a small leather satchel containing the Chapman will and coins. Davies carried a sealed envelope addressed to Inspector Gregory. Neither spoke much. Both understood the gravity of their mission. "Do you think the inspector will grant permission?" Davies asked quietly as the train began to pull in. Miss Marple offered a gentle smile. "Inspector Gregory knows my reputation. Constable, if Geraldine's forgeries are as clear as our comparisons, I'm confident he'll act swiftly. And once we reach London, we can proceed to Woburn Square and confront Miss Edith Fairchild. She holds the last piece of the puzzle." They found seats in a nearly empty carriage, and the countryside sped past, green fields giving way to suburbs, and finally brick terraces. Miss Marple reviewed her notes. The forged marginalia, the duplicate flourishes, the cipher pointing to the hidden desk panel, and Edith's address at 37 Woburn Square. All roads now led to 2 London townhouses. First, Geraldine's Society Archives, then Fairchild's lodging. At Paddington, they navigated the labyrinth of taxis and porters, until finally boarding a hansom bound for Bloomsbury. Miss Marple peered out at Victorian facades, her gaze settling on the neat brick house with its pale blue door and brass knocker. Davies disembarked and took position beyond the threshold. Miss Marple lifted her parasol and approached. She rapped on the door 3 times, in the pattern of a signal she once used to summon a gardener's help. A soft shuffle from within. The door opened to reveal a woman of slender build in black. Wool Edith Fairchild, her face ashen, eyes wide with apprehension. "Miss Marple," Edith whispered, her voice breathless. I wasn't expecting you so soon." "Good morning, Miss Fairchild," Miss Marple replied calmly. "I trust. You received my letter via Mrs. Heath in Stonyford?" Edith nodded. "Yes, I did. I've been meaning to write, but circumstances—" she faltered. "Circumstances indeed," Miss Marple said gently. "May I come in?" Edith stepped aside. "Of course." She held the door open, and Miss Marple entered, pausing on the threshold. The narrow hallway smelled faintly of lavender, and a small bureau by the stairs bore a single photograph of a younger Cornelia Chapman. Next to it lay a stack of letters addressed to an E. Fairchild. Miss Marple continued into a modest sitting-room. A low chaise held a folded throw. Bookshelves lined the walls, some volumes missing. A perfumed candle flickered on the mantelpiece. Edith closed the door behind them, her hands clasped at her waist. "I apologize for any intrusion," Miss Marple said, lowering her parasol. "But I must ask about your visits to Maplecroft and about your involvement with Mr. Reginald Geraldine." A ghost of color crept into Edith's cheeks. "I did not conspire with him. Yes, I told him of family rumors about my great-aunts. Private study, but only after I learned of Chapman's hidden room from Bernard Pembroke himself. He had confided in me when he saw me in London some weeks prior." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "Bernard saw you in London? When did this occur?" Edith swallowed. "He attended a conference on local history at the British Museum. I recognized him there and approached him. I mentioned Chapman's shop, my inheritance, and he told me he believed there was a secret drawer behind the desk. He thought I would appreciate knowing, as a family member." "And you told Geraldine these details?" Miss Marple pressed softly. Edith's eyes filled with tears. He asked questions, how the key felt in the lock, how the panel clicked. I did not realize his interest extended beyond academic curiosity. I never suspected he would remove Chapman's original letters and forge her handwriting. Miss Marple inclined her head. Your candor is appreciated, but Miss Fairchild, your family name and your willingness to guide Geraldine directly tied you to the forgeries. It appears he used your information to gain access to Chapman's originals in London, replaced them with modified copies, then reintroduced the forgeries into the Society's archives. Edith's hands trembled. I never intended for that. When I learned of the cipher from Bernard, I thought to confirm Chapman's benevolence. It was Geraldine who insisted on tampering to create sensational discoveries for his lectures. Miss Marple studied her. So you believe Geraldine bore sole responsibility for the forged marginalian, and that your mistake was sharing knowledge of the hidden study? Edith nodded. Yes, I begged him to stop, but he pressed on. He said the Society would reward him handsomely for a new public revelation of Chapman's secret bequest, and he feared Pembroke would expose him to Dr. Webb. Miss Marple took a deep breath. Then our conspirator is Mr. Geraldine. Our next step is to meet Inspector Gregory at the Society headquarters and secure Geraldine's original documents. But first, Miss Fairchild, I must ask you to cooperate fully with the inquiry. Your testimony will exonerate you of malicious intent. Tears rolled down Edith's cheeks. I will do whatever is necessary. Miss Marple offered her hand. Thank you, Miss Fairchild. I shall accompany you to the Society together with Inspector Gregory, and no one need know that you acted under misapprehension. They left Woburn Square and took a hansom to the Psychical Research Society's London offices in Bloomsbury. The building's narrow facade bore a small brass plaque. Miss Marple paused in the foyer, where a uniformed attendant ushered them into a high-ceilinged drawing-room furnished with antique chairs and a grand writing desk. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating the Society's crest embroidered on velvet drapes. Moments later, Inspector Gregory arrived, an imposing man with silver sideburns and keen gray eyes. He greeted them briskly. Mrs. Marple, Constable Davies, and Miss Fairchild, let us proceed to the archives. He led them through a series of corridors to the vault-like repository. Inside, Mr. Reginald Geraldine stood before a shelf, examining a leather folio. His expression flickered from surprise to something near anger when he saw the assembled group led by the inspector. Reginald, Gregory said coolly, I believe we have a few questions regarding your recent additions to Chapman's correspondence. You care to explain the discrepancies between these original letters and the marginalia we discovered in Stonyford? Geraldine's cheeks flushed. He stammered, I merely sought to clarify ambiguous passages. I saw no harm. Miss Marple stepped forward. Mr. Geraldine, the additional flourishes in your notes do not match Chapman's handwriting. You replaced the originals in the vault with forged copies and sent them to Maplecroft. Bernard Pembroke uncovered the cipher and realized the truth before his unfortunate accident. Geraldine sank into a chair, head bowed. I regret my actions. The Society rewarded publication of Chapman's hidden will with an article in the journal, but when I saw the public acclaim, I feared exposure by Pembroke would ruin my career. I panicked. Inspector Gregory produced the sealed envelope from Davies. Behold the letter from Mrs. Marple detailing the Chapman will and coins, still intact. You manipulated the Society's records for personal gain, an offense both academic and criminal. He turned to his clerk. Please prepare the necessary statements. Mr. Geraldine, you are under investigation." Geraldine nodded miserably. Understanding his fate, Edith Fairchild stepped forward. "Inspector, with your permission, I wish to speak. I shared details of Chapman's hidden study, yet my intent was to preserve her legacy, not to profit from it." Gregory regarded her gravely. "Your cooperation is noted. Miss Fairchild, given that you acted under Bernard Pembroke's influence, we may consider leniency. Your testimony is crucial to this inquiry." Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. The conspirators were unmasked. The archivist whose ambition led him to forge Chapman's words, and the unwitting family member whose trust became a tool for betrayal. The chapels of history and memory were cleared of deception. As they departed the society offices, Miss Marple glanced at Edith Fairchild. "Your great-aunt would be proud that her true intentions, the benefit of those in need, have triumphed over greed." Edith nodded, relief shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Marple." Miss Marple patted her arm. "Now let us send word to Cornelia Otterburn in Stonyford. The Chapman legacy, restored at last, will endure honestly, and the debts of the past have finally been paid." Chapter 10. The Final Reckoning. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Maplecroft Books as Cornelia Otterburn unlocked the shop for the first time since the London trial. The village felt transformed lighter, as though a burden long borne had finally lifted. Inside, shelves gleamed undisturbed, the hidden alcove sealed behind its deadbolt and new lock. A brass plaque now marked the panel: "Cornelia Chapman's Secret Archive Access by Trust Only." Cornelia ran her fingers over the polished wood, remembering the anxious days of forged marginalia and creeping suspicion. Today brought an end to the shadows that had stalked her shop, and a renewal of Chapman's legacy in its truest form. Miss Marple arrived shortly after opening, her straw hat adorned with a sprig of fresh lilac, a gift from Cornelia to celebrate the shop's reopening. She greeted Cornelia with a gentle nod. "How does it feel to reclaim your history?" Cornelia inhaled the scent of old leather and lavender that filled the air. "It feels like coming home," she whispered. "And knowing that Chapman's charity will finally reach the orphans she loved, it warms my heart." Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on Cornelia's shoulder. "Her intentions survive," she said softly, "and now her name stands untainted." Across the village green, the vicar's voice rang out in thanksgiving as Reverend Stokes led a small service in the churchyard. The congregation gathered under budding spring branches, offering prayers for Chapman's kind spirit and for Bernard Pembroke's recovery. He was discharged from the hospital with no lasting harm. Even the most skeptical villagers found themselves moved by the story of hidden generosity, restored authenticity, and the courage of a quiet old woman and her devoted companion. After the benediction, Miss Marple exchanged greetings with Lucy Fairchild and her cousin Edith, now reconciled by shared understanding and regret. Lucy and Edith stood side by side, the morning light illuminating their faces. Lucy clutched Chapman's original will, now bound in a protective slipcase. Edith held the leather satchel of sovereigns. "Our great-aunt's wishes were clear," Lucy said, her voice steady. "Let this trust serve the children of Stonyford." Edith nodded, tears glistening. "And let my mistake remind us all to honor truth before ambition." Together they signed paperwork at the vicarage, formalizing the Fairchild Trust's distribution plan. Miss Marple watched from the sidelines, pride shining in her eyes. Back at the bookshop, Cornelia had arranged a small exhibition of Chapman's artifacts, the ciphered ledger, the brass key, and the oak box that had sheltered her will for more than a century. The first visitors were local school teachers and members of the parish council, who marveled at the story woven through margins and floorboards. Each guest received a printed leaflet recounting Chapman's quiet philanthropy, Bernard's curious discovery, and the joint efforts of Miss Marple, Dr. Webb, Lucy, and Edith to restore integrity. The display, illuminated by gentle lamplight, felt sacred like a chapel to honest charity. Late that afternoon, Miss Marple and Cornelia sat in the alcove with cups of tea and slices of lemon cake. Mrs. Otterburn sighed with contentment. "I never imagined books could harbor such mysteries," she said. Miss Marple smiled. "Books hold worlds, memories, and sometimes the keys to hearts long closed." She sipped her tea. "And Maplecroft Books will now stand for Chapman's true spirit, kindness, discretion, and unassuming generosity." Cornelia nodded, her eyes moist. "Thank you, Jane, for guiding me through dark times." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the hidden door. "The past is not always dead," she mused, "but when handled with care can enrich the present." That evening Miss Marple walked home through the quiet lanes of Stonyford. Lanterns glowed above the cobblestones, and the scent of lilac lingered in the air. She paused by the village, green, now empty save for a lone dog chasing fireflies. The world felt right again, a tapestry mended by truth, friendship, and courage. Miss Marple's mind replayed each step, the cipher's revelation, the forging of Chapman's legacy, the unmasking of Geraldine, and the heartfelt contrition of Edith Fairchild. Justice had been served, and Chapman's benevolence would endure. At her cottage door Miss Marple paused, pressing her hand to the cool brass knocker. Inside, her cat Purdy greeted her with a soft mew. She fed her supper by lamplight, then settled into her favorite armchair with Pembroke's notebook, now free of bloodstains and deception. She penned a final note to Inspector Gregory, gratitude for swift action, commendation for Constable Davies's dedication, and a promise to assist in any future inquiries that might call upon her experience. With a contented sigh she extinguished the lamp. In the hush of night, Miss Marple reflected on the lessons of Maplecroft Books, that secrets can both bind and betray, that ambition must be tempered by empathy, and that even the most unassuming community can harbor deep mysteries. Above all, she felt the enduring power of truth, guided by a keen mind and a generous heart. As sleep claimed her, she dreamed of dusty tomes, whispering pages, and the faint echo of Chapman's voice reminding her that the past, when tended kindly, can illuminate the path forward.